You probably think Ron Howard is Hollywood's sweet, easygoing director. Right? The kind of guy everyone loves. And for the most part, he is. But there's another side to him. One that you don't often see. Behind that famous smile, there's a hidden truth. Ron Howard has a list. A blacklist to be exact. And it's made up of some pretty shocking names. These weren't just colleagues to him. Some were friends. Some were mentors. These were the people who helped him achieve greatness, but in the end, they helped tear down everything he'd worked so hard to build. We're talking about stars with fiery egos, outrageous on-set feuds, and moments that pushed even Hollywood's most patient man to his breaking point. So, here's the story of the top actors Ron Howard would never work with again. And trust me, you're not going to believe who made the list. Let's start with number 1, Jim Carrey. Now, we all know Jim Carrey as this big zany force of nature, right? But in 2000, he wasn't just playing the Grinch in How the Grinch Stole Christmas, he became the Grinch. And that transformation, as chaotic as it was, nearly broke Ron Howard. Jim was brilliant, of course. But when you spend 8 hours a day trapped in layers of latex and fur, things start to get worse. Well, let's just say a little tense. By the third day, Carrey wasn't just frustrated, he was unraveling. He was lashing out at anyone in his path, even Howard himself. One morning, he ripped off his gloves and shouted, "You try acting inside a rubber coffin." The whole crew froze. Howard did his best to keep things cool. But the tension was palpable. Carrey started improvising his lines, tossing scripts aside like they didn't matter. It got so bad, Howard had to go to Universal executives, practically begging them to step in, and their solution: they brought in a Navy SEAL, a guy trained to withstand torture, to help Carrey cope with the costume. The movie became a holiday classic, but for Howard, it was a personal war. He later admitted that the film aged him a decade. Jim, on the other hand, jokingly said the whole experience felt like being buried alive. And while they both smile when talking about it now, they know deep down it wasn't just the Grinch who changed that year, it was their relationship. When asked if he'd ever work with Carrey again, Howard simply said, "Jim is brilliant, but some brilliance burns too hot." Next up is number 2, Cillian Murphy. When Ron Howard cast Murphy in The Heart of the Sea in 2015, he thought he was bringing in a perfect partner. Murphy was known for his intelligence, his calm demeanor, and everything Howard valued. At first, it seemed like a match made in heaven. Murphy even called Howard the kindest director I've ever worked with. But as the production dragged on with months of starvation, diets, freezing water, and grueling shoots, the cracks started to show. The film demanded that the cast survive on just 600 calories a day to look convincingly emaciated. They spent hours soaked and shivering in the cold. And that's when things began to shift. Murphy, once enthusiastic, started feeling more like a lab rat than an artist. He once confided in a friend, "He pushes you past what feels human. You trust him, but some days you just want to scream." Howard, being the diplomat he is, saw it differently. In interviews, he said, Cillian is fiercely dedicated. But sometimes he mistakes intensity for conflict. It was that very clash that created a rift between them. And it came to a head during a brutal sequence where Murphy's character collapses onto a lifeboat. After hours in freezing water, Murphy refused to do another take. I'm done, he said, exhausted. If you want it colder, you can play the part yourself. Howard, ever the professional, simply replied, well, warm you up, then finish. They did, but that warmth never really returned. Years later, when asked if he'd work with Howard again, Murphy said, Ron expects absolute surrender. I'm not sure I have that to give anymore. Howard, as always, took the high road. He later explained in a podcast, Cillian is brilliant, but some actors confuse discomfort with discovery. For me, they're often the same thing. Did their feud end? Well, not really. They never publicly trashed each other, but there's no doubt their working relationship cooled. Rumor has it Howard wanted Murphy for 13 Wives in 2022, but the offer never made it to him. And then there's number 3. Russell Crowe. If you think Ron Howard had it easy with Crowe after Beautiful Mind, think again. Sure, that film was a critical triumph, but there were whispers on set about creative clashes between the two. Crowe, a method actor, was deeply committed to his characters, while Howard, ever the architect, valued precision, order, and discipline. Their working relationship teetered on the edge during Cinderella Man, where tensions boiled over. Howard later called that experience the toughest film of my life, and it's no surprise why. Crowe pushed himself and everyone around him harder than anyone anticipated. Their dynamic shifted and the once promising partnership crumbled under the weight of their differing approaches. By the end of it, Howard had learned a hard truth. Some creative forces just don't mix. It's a theme you'll see again and again with Ron Howard. His patience, his discipline, his commitment to his craft, but also his breaking point. These are the actors who once stood beside him, but for one reason or another, fell out of favor. And while Hollywood's nicest guy may still wear that calm exterior, behind it is a man who's seen it all. The good, the bad, and the ugly. And when it comes to working with some of the biggest stars in the world, sometimes even Ron Howard's patience runs out. Filming began in 2004, and from the moment the cameras rolled, the set felt like a powder keg ready to explode. Russell Crowe stepped onto the set like a general preparing for battle. And according to one crew member, that's exactly what it felt like. Crowe wasn't there to be directed. He was there to take charge. He questioned everything. The lighting, the camera angles, the pacing of emotional moments. He had a vision. And it didn't always align with Ron Howard's. During one tense boxing scene, Crowe reportedly yelled across the ring, "You don't understand the character's pain." Ron Howard, the calm, composed director, didn't shout back. He didn't even move. He simply stood there silent. But that silence, it was deafening. Crew members later said it felt like the kind of silence that speaks louder than any outburst. As production dragged on, things only got more intense. Crowe insisted on reshooting entire monologues, claiming he didn't believe in the emotion behind them. Howard, determined to keep the film on schedule, found himself stuck in a struggle where he was trying to build a masterpiece while riding a bucking bull. He told the producers, working with Russell is like trying to build a church while riding a bull. The film turned out to be a triumph. Cinderella Man was critically acclaimed and Crowe delivered one of his most grounded performances. But when the press started asking about the possibility of them teaming up again, Howard's smile said it all. Once was enough, he told one interviewer. Crowe, years later, sugarcoat the tension. Hey there. Ron and I just have different rhythms, he admitted. He's meticulous. Every shot is measured, every emotion planned. Chaotic. I need to feel it at the moment. We just collided. Their final conversation after Cinderella Man wasn't filled with insults or arguments. Just a quiet exhaustion. They shook hands, made a polite promise to stay in touch, and then they went their separate ways, knowing they would never work together again. Over time, the edges softened, but the distance remained. In 2019, when asked if he'd ever work with Crowe again, Howard's response was telling. Russell is a force of nature. You don't direct a force, you survive it. Crowe, in his own way, showed respect for Howard in a 2020 interview, saying, Ron's one of the best. We just approach the mountain differently. Then there's number 4, Tom Cruise. It's hard to imagine Ron Howard, the calm, steady director known for films like Apollo 13 and A Beautiful Mind, clashing with anyone, but in 1992, he met his match in Tom Cruise on the set of Far and Away. At the time, Cruise was untouchable. He had conquered the box office with Top Gun and earned respect with Born on the 4th of July. Howard, on the other hand, was carving out a reputation as the director who could turn chaos into clarity. Together, they seemed like the perfect fit. On set, however, it became a slow-burning war. From the first week of filming in Dublin, the tension was palpable. Cruise, always energetic, wanted everything to be bigger. Sweat, screams, fury, the raw pulse of life. Howard, the quiet perfectionist, wanted the opposite. Patience, precision, subtlety. The two styles collided constantly. During one rain-soaked take, Cruise stopped in the middle of the shot, threw off his gloves, and shouted, "This doesn't feel real." Howard, unfazed, simply replied, "Real isn't about noise, Tom." The air between them froze, and that freeze would linger throughout the entire shoot. Even Nicole Kidman, caught in the middle, tried to play peacemaker between the two, but by then the damage was already done. Crew members later described the set as being like a boxing match without the punches. Lines were rewritten, new takes were demanded, and there was constant arguing about whether Howard's steady, controlled direction was stifling the fire that Cruise wanted to ignite. Slowly, Howard's trademark calm started to slip. In the background, he began shooting extra coverage behind Cruise's back just in case the actor decided to change his delivery again. In post-production, insiders say Howard Called the whole thing a marathon of control disguised as collaboration. When Far and Away finally premiered, critics admired its grand scale, but many pointed out its uneven tone, something that could be attributed to the tug-of-war between two vastly different approaches. Months later, Howard spoke about the experience with his usual diplomatic restraint, though there was an edge to his words. Some people confuse passion with chaos, he remarked. It was an direct shot at Cruise, but everyone knew who he was talking about. Cruise, for his part, didn't seem to hold a grudge, at least publicly. In a 2002 interview, he called Howard a consummate professional. But with a grin, he added, "We just see filmmaking differently. Ron wants control. I want combustion." The two men have never worked together again. When asked in 2019 if he'd direct Cruise again, Howard's response was as measured as ever, but final. Tom's intensity is extraordinary. But sometimes the energy on set needs to flow in more than one direction. Then there's number 5. Chevy Chase. Ron Howard,